Good afternoon. This is Jean-Philippe Lebleu with Matthew Arrett for another leadership discussion from the Committee for the Republic of Canada. Today we're September 7th, 2013. We're going to focus on the danger of war, not simply a danger of war with Syria, a danger actually a world war which could turn nuclear. And we'll talk about some of the recent events regarding this danger. Also, Matt is going to be discussing the question of Canada, what's Canada's role into all of this, its historical and more modern role into the British imperial plot. And I'm going to be discussing some of the recent issues that are concerning everybody. First, I'd like to speak regarding the fact that we had last week a speech by Barack Obama where he declared that he had to postpone his own intention to attack Syria and to actually go through the Congress of the United States to ask for permission. This was actually preceded by an historical vote in the British government where the British rejected the idea of an attack on the Syrian government. And it was a clear vote against this war. And also there's other opposition, but the fact that Obama had to postpone the war is very significant, although it's only a postponement. Also this week what you had is that you had a G20 meeting in Russia during which Obama pretty much declared the United Nations Security Council to be simply dead and useless because it wasn't responding as he is responding to the crisis of the use of chemical weapons. While opposite to that, President Vladimir Putin of Russia talked about his continued support to the Syrian government, which means weapons, which means logistics, and also defending the national sovereignty of the whole region of the Middle East. Plus also he explained that actually the United States had to bring real solid proofs about the supposed use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government, and Putin, tossed aside the warmongers who are not that numerous in fact. You have France, you have the United States, Israel, but there are other countries like Italy, Russia, or even India against the war. Now the situation that people got to understand is that the war is postponed, but we have two problems, which are two problems relating to insanity. The first one is Obama. Obama is a narcissistic character, just like Hitler was or Nero was. That is that you tell him what to do, he's not going to listen to you. And the fact that he said in his speech last week, he said that he would go, that he knows he can go to war by himself. He knows he doesn't need the Congress to act, but he still asks because there's been a lot of pressure on him. Now, the other problem is that the British Parliament, who had this historical vote, well, they're still stuck with a big problem, just like in Canada, is that they're not deciding if they go to war or not. They can vote on it, it looks good, and it shows the popular support against the war. But ultimately, it's going to be an old wrinkly lady, that's going to decide whether we go to war, and that's the Queen of England. So in such context, I mean, we can't just stick with demonstrations and blasting the bad guys. We really have to create an enormous change. And all this war propaganda is happening in a context of a financial and economic meltdown worldwide. There is a British imperial system collapsing. Banks, as people have seen, we're not going to go too much into the details of that. We're going to stick to the war, but we're facing with a banking collapse worldwide. Major institutions are going under, and they're forcing nations to whether bail them out or bail them in, depending, and to save those useless institutions like Wall Street, or and then impose austerity, impose killer budget cuts like we've seen in nations like Greece, or more recently in the United States in cities like Detroit, who are pretty much being given to the sharks, where we just shut down public pensions, and we try to pay for the debt owed to the banks. Now, in such a context, you need a whole revolution, because what's being proposed to the world right now is desolation and destruction through whether economic measures or through a war, a world war. So what I'm going to do now, we're going to come back on this question of the British, because the British Empire, this is something we're going to emphasize a bit more. And right now we're going to talk first about the opposition to the war, which is not just a popular opposition, which is an opposition coming from various high-level networks throughout the world, but especially the United States. The United States, who have a sense, unlike a lot of people, they have a sense of what the Iraq War meant. They have a sense that this was a failure, and they don't want to get into that again. So first, I think the most known opposition to the war coming from the United States is Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, who's been eloquent about not going to war with Syria or Iran, that this would be an act of war, that this would be a regional mess and could trigger nations like Russia and China to intervene. And also that, as he said personally to Barack Obama before his speech last week, he said, look, if you go to war without Congress, you might suffer in terms of your approval ratings. And that's the kind of language probably Obama understands. If you tell him about reason, he's not going to listen. But if his approval ratings are threatened, then he might do something worthwhile. So he's been very, very direct about not going to war. That's one of them. Also, I think it's worth to mention in the United Nations, right now, as people might know, there is an investigation as to whether the Syrian government has used chemical weapons recently against their population, or if it's the opposition, the so-called rebels, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra type of groups. And in May of this year, there's the judge, Carla Del Ponte, who's a UN commissioner, who was in charge of studying certain events during that time in May as to whether the Syrian government had used chemical weapons at that time. And she revealed to the world that actually it was probably the rebels that used those weapons. Now, she's not the only one who said that. There's actually evidence coming from the Iraqi government and the Turkish government that rebels were caught trying to smuggle chemical weapons or trying to actually fabricate, like in the case of Iraq, to fabricate various types of nervous gas to be spread around to various Al-Qaeda groups. Also, I think a newcomer in the groups against the war is French General Henri Paris, who recently gave an interview to our movement in France, the movement Solidarité et Progrès, where he discusses with Christine Bière, one of our members over there, that he's not just against the war in Syria, but he says that this is going to become a regional war, and that this will actually destroy any type of diplomatic solution possible. And he mentioned the Geneva II meeting, which is supposed to occur at the end of the year to discuss Syria, sovereignty. Should we change the government? What should we do? So basically a diplomatic effort done by the United Nations and other countries backing this up. There's also, if you look a bit deeper in the United States, we have retired General Barry McCaffrey, who worked under the Clinton government and who recently came out, and he asked a pretty good question. He said, he confronted Obama with a question saying, if you go to war now, but in a few weeks, the United Nations tells you that it's actually the rebels who use the chemical weapons, what the hell is gonna happen to you? Nobody's gonna believe you. So that's going to be that would be like total hell. But at the same time, he says, that all these evidence regarding the chemical weapons, they're just not sufficient. That you need concrete proof, and these proofs aren't there. Similar also, maybe two more people in actually one more. Colonel Bob Simpson. Bob Simpson, who partook into a conference this month in Virginia, where he discussed a conference organized by the U.S. Army, where he discussed about the failures of the Iraq War, the fact that the military wasn't asked for advices in terms of preparing the post-war situation. And everybody knows now in Iraq it's total chaos. There's no serious government there. They're left by themselves, and so this failure was never really addressed in the United States. And now we're trying to get into a new conflict with Syria. What's going to happen afterwards? Are we really going to have a what he calls a plan to create, as he says, a human outcome to the war, which has never been discussed really seriously. So he says, if we go to war with Syria, that's not going to work. And there's obviously a lot of opposition, people simply saying, look, you can't, they say the United Nations, the United States security is not threatened by Syria. So why would we go there at all? It's not our fight. So these various individuals, they show the same kind of a concern. You know, and one big question that came up, and actually it's a question that came up also in the letter that was sent by the Syrian parliament, sent to the US Congress recently, in the letter which they say, well, why don't we fight a common enemy, Al-Qaeda? They're all over our country. Help us out, get those guys out. Don't give them more weapons. At the same time, there's another question that they pop out saying, and it's a question that also Vladimir Putin brought up and other people saying, if the Syrian government used chemical weapons just recently, what was the purpose? Because actually the Syrian government is still in a position of power. They didn't use chemical weapons in an area that actually where there were terrorists or there were those so-called rebels. Plus, why would they use chemical weapons so close to, let's say it was 4 miles away from the United Nations delegation that was there? So nobody understands, nor does General Henri Paris. They don't understand why would you do that. It's totally ridiculous. And the most probable idea or the most probable scenario is that it would be the rebels who are trying to actually get something going internationally, saying, okay, the government, Syrian government used chemical weapons, come and back us up, give us guns, give us logistics. So so as I was saying, the war has been postponed. The evidence for war is not there at all. We have a bunch of warmongers again, typified by Obama, Tony Blair. We got guys like Stephen Harper, or actually during the G20 meeting, after deciding that that Canada would not get involved, still declared that he was against Putin's position, and that reiterating the same thing that Obama is saying in terms of that the threat comes from the Syrian government, although there's no proof to that. So must not confuse. We're talking about a danger of a world war that Syria would be the trigger of, and we have a pretty hectic situation. But Matt, why don't you go through